but the guts of the German army have been largely torn out.
Ich fasse das als eine Bestätigung des Auftrags der Vorsehung aus.
With thy blessing, we shall prevail over the unholy forces of our enemy.
Baby, won't you please come home? 'Cause your mama's all alone. I have tried in vain, never no more to call your name. When you left, you broke my heart, 'cause I never thought we'd part. Now every moment of the day, you can hear me say, baby, come on home, I need your loving. Baby, please, come on home.
If newspaper was my wife, radio became my mistress. But don't blame me for my infidelity to the facts. My work in newspapers gave me the permission to transcend the truth. My name is Sefton Delmer, and I was the first newspaperman to interview Hitler in 1932. At first, I thought he was a harmless crackpot, but eventually I saw him for what he was, an aggressive threat to Europe, perhaps even the world. After I got kicked out of Germany, in 1941, Churchill on the War Cabinet got me thinking about creating a fake radio program to help bring down Hitler. Naturally, I loved the idea. I assembled a team to create these so-called black propaganda broadcasts. My good friend Ian Fleming joined to help me with the script writing. Agnes Bernal, a young German refugee and talented actress, became our radio star Vicky. Approximately 80% of our scripts were real news. The other 20% were carefully concocted lies. Agnes would read these scripts over the radio. Using the most powerful transmitter in Europe, we could broadcast signals into Germany, tricking the enemy into thinking they were listening to real German radio stations. The goal of our black propaganda was to turn the German people against the Nazis, to demoralize the German soldiers, and most of all, to give the Germans something Hitler didn't want them to have. Jazz.
You were right about her. Radio doesn't do her justice.
Otto, my friend, you should have seen her in Fine and Dandy at the Seville Theatre.
I can only imagine.
Dad, would you want to work or just tell jokes with your friend?
Oh, I'm sorry, but this is his first taste of black propaganda.
It's much nicer than I expected.
And you are?
Oh, forgive me, this is Otto John, one of the July 20th fellows who managed to escape. He may join us as an expert on the resistance.
Agnes Bernal, sideshow in Dalmas Circus.
I must say, it is a pleasure to meet the girl who once instructed all good German citizens to send their morning urine to the Führer in a small bottle.
I heard it took 3 weeks to flush those things through the German postal system.
That was one of my better ideas. Fleming. Ian Fleming. Special Assistant to the Director of Intelligence, His Majesty's Navy.
Pleased to meet you.
You know, when this war is over, I'm going to write the spy novel to end all spy novels. And you're going to be in every one of them.
Well, that's if the Doodlebug rockets don't get us first. Yeah. Tom, are we actually going to do this thing tonight? Mm-hmm. Where's Howard? I thought he was going to play General Beck.
He had to cancel something about wanting to write the script or but I think my German will hold up.
Okay, well, I'm ready when you are. The song's just about over.
Hier meldet sich Vicky mit 3 Küssen für euch. Mua, mua, mua. Heute habe ich eine besondere Überraschung für euch. Viele von euch werden von dem Attentat auf Hitler gehört haben, das gescheitert ist, während dieser plattfüßige, betrunkene Bastard Winston Churchill sein vernichtendes Flächenbombardement der deutschen Städte fortsetzt. Aber im Gegensatz zur weit verbreiteten Fehlinformation ist Generaloberst Ludwig Beck nicht tot. Woher ich das weiß? Hier ist die Antwort.
Hier spricht Generaloberst Ludwig Beck. Ich bin nicht tot.
So, this is your war of wits.
Total war. I must warn you that in my unit we're up to all kinds of dirty tricks. The dirtier the better. Lies, treachery, everything. No holds barred. If you're at all squeamish about what you may be called upon to do against your fellow Germans, you're no good to us. What do you say?
Mr. Delmer, my friends have given their lives to rid Germany of this Satan. Whatever you ask of me, whatever quickens the defeat of Hitler, I consider it a continuation of the work of my countrymen. Otherwise, those who died in Valkyrie were the lucky ones. And those still alive in Germany will have hell to pay.
The German underground made an assassination attempt on the Führer, at least their 20th, led by Colonel Stauffenberg, called Operation Valkyrie. But the bomb's explosion didn't kill the madman, only perforating his eardrum and singeing his pants. An indignity that made him as furious as death itself.
120 people were either executed or took their own lives in order not to be tortured by the Gestapo and then betray names of their friends.
Natürlich! Sie haben ja bestätigt, dass Sie KV sind. Also, und werden Sie hier nicht unverschämt!
Soon, all those involved found themselves in the crosshairs of the German Gestapo in Freisler's People's Court.
Even though the Gestapo was rather dim-witted, it did not take too much creativity to figure out the resistance was primarily the old upper class. When you look at the list of those hung, you have all the names that made Prussia great. Moltke, Schwerin, Schulenburg, Joch, and so on.
After the initial executions, the dragnet expanded to include anyone suspected of being involved in the assassination attempt. This included theologian and pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German who was a nuisance to the Nazi Party and had been for years speaking out actively against the Führer. Such boldness had landed him in Tegel prison.
I'm still discovering right up to this moment that it is only by living completely in this world that one learns to have faith. By this worldliness, I mean living unreservedly in life's duties, problems, successes and failures, experiences and perplexities. In doing so, we throw ourselves completely into the arms of God taking seriously not our own sufferings, but those of God in the world.
The time in Tegel prison after the failure of the coup, it's from this moment on when he has to reckon with his own death. And he's enamored with this figure of Moses on Mount Nebo. Moses who gets to look into the promised land but will not enter it. That's Bonhoeffer and the conspirators.
Grant me to witness through the veil of death my people at their high triumphant feast. I fail and sink into thine eternity, but see my people marching forward, free. Stay, hold my nerveless hands, let fall my staff. Thou faithful God, prepare me for my grave.
Some of the records will say that he, with others, pretty much felt their fate was sealed and that it was over, that their lives would likely end. But you know, as the weeks went on, I'm not so sure that if I was in his place or any of us would know that that's truly a possibility. But I think they had also seen enough serendipitous stuff happen. I would still guess that they thought there was a slim chance that somebody might intervene and they could see the next month and years of their life.
Kulturnachrichten. Die Hochzeit des Jobs von Josef Haas feierte der Staatsoper in Dresden große Erfolge.
The Allies were pushing their way across France towards Germany. Our radio broadcasts were, of course, already there, serving up a daily delicious blend of fact and fiction to whoever might be listening. By 1944, I had long since traded decency for deception, throwing myself completely into the work of crushing Nazi Germany. How many listeners believed our black propaganda we never knew, but enough successful reports came in to make me hope there were many. It was hard work, but also quite fun.
You do know that nobody will be able to see your lipstick on the radio.
I know. But you will.
There's wine on the Rhine. 2 barrels have broken and lost their spirits.
Is that code?
Just as we hoped. We lured them over the Alps with the false coordinates we broadcast. And they ran out of fuel.
What do you know? Your black propaganda actually works.
Recently, we even had the SS arresting each other.
Mostly we just keep those faithful German soldiers worried sick that their wives aren't quite so faithful.
And if those soldiers die, Sefton sends cheery letters to their families to make them think they're still alive.
Why?
Spreads rumors, breaks morale.
Second one in 6 months.
What about me?
I think the coordinates were Sefton's idea. If I remember correctly, you were busy creating sexist names for your future spy novels.
Now, what shall we report today?
I have an idea.
Let's hear it.
We finally announced the formal agreement between the German resistance and the Allies.
Ian.
It's time.
You keep pitching that.
Save it for your book, Ian. Nobody wants more spies and double agents.
We have Otto now.
He's here for the details.
Well, then why?
Every German resistor is seen by the Allies as a spy pretending to be anti-Nazi. Remember the Venlo fiasco? A most unpleasant introduction to the German resistance.
That was nearly 5 years ago.
Will our audience really believe that high-ranking Germans would turn against Hitler?
But they have. We have. My brother Hans and I were recruited into the resistance by Klaus Bonhoeffer. The entire Bonhoeffer family was very anti-Nazi, even before the start of the war.
This is good, Otto. Tell us more.
We would often meet at the Bonhoeffer home in order to discuss plans to eliminate Hitler.
We were involved in the attempted coup in 1938.
This was a plan organized by Hans Oster, and there were top generals supporting us, even the Berlin chief of police. Our plan was to wait for Hitler's order to attack Czechoslovakia and then with lightning speed seize him in the chancellery. Professor Bonhoeffer, head of psychiatry at Berlin University, would then declare him insane. Subsequently, he would be removed from power.
What happened?
The world gave in to Germany's demands. No shots were fired, and Czechoslovakia was erased from the map. Hitler looked like a statesman. No one would have supported a coup. Our best chance came in 1943. We disguised a bomb as 2 bottles of brandy using a captured British explosive with a pencil detonator. After months of preparation, we enacted our plan, which we called Operation Flash. We managed to give the bomb to Colonel Brandt, telling him it was a gift, which he placed on Hitler's plane. We toasted our luck in getting the explosive right under the Führer. And later that night, we toasted the detonator that failed. It's as if the devil is protecting him.
But who would believe all this?
Why is that so hard to believe? That a German might act out of a sense of conscience and not simply self-interest. Why have you invited me here if you believe, as Churchill does, that there is no such thing as a good German?
That's not what I said.
No, but it's what you meant.
Listen,
Klaus's brother, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, managed to get out of Germany in 1939. He made it all the way to New York City. It was his conscience that made him return.
A pastor? Taking part in the assassination plot?
Because of my job with the airlines, I too could have fled, but I followed Dietrich's lead. We were resistors for God and country, before Hitler was losing the war. When we had something to lose.
My apologies. Churchill dismissed the German resistors at Valkyrie as an internal disease. But it was clear that the German pastor, with others, was inspired into action by a deep Christian conviction. But who was Dietrich? One of 8 children. He got his PhD at 21. A man of intellect, but a man of the world who loved to travel. Cuba, North Africa, Mexico. He loved the bullfights of Barcelona. He had lived in America for a year, much of his time in Harlem.
Bonhoeffer loves life, and he savors life. One time when Karl Barth sent a cigar by way of Eberhard Bethge to Bonhoeffer in prison, Bonhoeffer responds, "This is a sacrament." This is a kind of savoring of life.
This likable misfit was also part of a highly educated and well-connected family. When Hitler came into power in 1933, Germans were ready for something more than the chaos of Weimar and the humiliation of World War I. But it seems the Bonhoeffer family was one of the few who didn't think this was the rebirth of Germany.
The interesting part of the Bonhoeffer house in Charlottenburg during those years, I think, was the coming together of so many important people. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was the confessing church pastor, and in some ways was a fly on the wall, because gathering there would be his brother-in-law, Hans von Dohnanyi, who some would claim was the intellectual head of the July 20th plot. Rüdiger Schleicher and his brother-in-law and his brother Klaus had key parts to play in that plot as it unfolded, and I'm sure they found in the house on the Marienburger Allee a safe place of trusted people.
It turns out that several in that family, especially Hans von Dohnanyi, was high-placed in the military counterintelligence, the Abwehr. So the Bonhoeffer family had access to information about the medical experiments, later on about the concentration camps. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer understood the degrees of hell in that land.
Oster and Canaris, at the recommendation of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's brother-in-law, Hans von Dohnanyi, recommended that Dietrich Bonhoeffer be employed and used by the Abwehr, military intelligence, because of his ecumenical contacts and his relations with parts of the world where they thought the Nazis could use some good public relations. Even though his past had shown some resistance to the National Socialist regime, the argument they used was that the Abwehr intelligence uses all kinds of people, not just people who've been loyal to the Reich.
So Bonhoeffer began visiting his Allied contacts, hoping they could convince Churchill to recognize the Germans plotting Hitler's assassination. One such trip, in 1942, took him to Norway under the guise of official work. But his real mission was to contact the local resistance movement. Accompanying him was another agent, Helmut von Moltke, and their time together, in many ways, brought the ethical challenges of the resistance into focus.
The two went together. They came to Sassnitz on the Isle of Rügen, and there was ice on the sea, and the ferry boat wouldn't go. So they had the night in the hotel and a whole morning for themselves, and they decided they would go to the Stubenkammer, the very famous chalk cliffs. And they had 4.5 hours to talk. I have tried for years to find out what the two have talked about. I was so frustrated in the end that I thought the beech trees would tell me what they had talked about. I said this as a joke to my family members because I wanted to go there and see the place. And we went there, and the beech trees didn't tell me anything. And then we went to Kreisau in Silesia, and I heard that the Countess Moltke had said, well, Bonhoeffer and my husband couldn't get together because Bonhoeffer was talking like a scribe. In the New Testament, they are the scribes. And in that moment, I knew what they had talked about. Because they had talked about the passage in Bonhoeffer's Ethics, which he had just worked out. Namely, is it allowed to kill the head of state? And especially, is it allowed for Christians who follow the commandment, thou shalt not kill?
I think it's too easy to try and force him into saying he was or was not a pacifist or was not an assassin. He knew he was living in an incredibly complex situation. Now, he deeply respected the pacifist position. He wanted to go to India to learn from Gandhi about non-violent resistance. He knew the cost of war. He'd lost a brother in the First World War. Yet what do you do? Do you preserve your innocence and therefore incur the guilt of doing nothing?
Bonhoeffer says we live in a country where the head of state orders the death of innocent people in their thousands day per day. And the only way we can stop it is that we kill him. And therefore, God leaves us free to do this as he left his son Jesus free to heal sick people on Sabbath day. And Count Moltke said you can't compare that.
But he says both militarism and rigid doctrinaire pacifism don't really deal with the question of how you act responsibly. You've got to face what is your duty towards God, and the test of that is what is going to happen to other people. And I think that question troubled him during the resistance. And he had to counsel people in the resistance who were facing that dilemma.
I think when someone asks, what did Bonhoeffer actually do? This is what he did. He speaks from his faith about the context that we are in in what Christ is actually calling us to do, why our faith compels us to do something different than what Nazi Christianity is asking of us.
His choice to be part of the conspiracy, I think, in the end, wasn't actually a choice. He knew that it was necessary. He knew that there were only a small handful of people who understood.
Back in Tegel prison, the Nazis moved closer to evidence of Dietrich's involvement in the assassination plot. Soon Bonhoeffer was forced into stricter quarters. They transferred him to the dregs of Prince Albrechtstrasse, number 8, the hellish prison in the basement of the Gestapo headquarters. Later, after surviving massive Allied bombing, he was transferred to the Buchenwald concentration camp. Buchenwald was a concentration camp, and many say the largest. I've heard the deaths were in the tens of thousands. A horror of German proportions. My apologies, Otto. On the edge of this death camp amidst countless atrocities, his chances of survival were not good. After 2 years in prison, Bonhoeffer was losing touch with the outside world. There are rumors his 20-year-old fiancée even visited Buchenwald to look for him, but was told he wasn't there. On his own, Dietrich was trapped with a strange mix of prisoners. If you can believe those who made it to freedom, the stories of his inmates are even better than I could have written. There was Hugh Falconer, part of a secret British sabotage and espionage organization. One, Dr. Hoven, was supposedly a failed actor who pretended to be a doctor and served as a medical officer in Buchenwald. Another, Dr. Sigmund Rascher, invented the suicide pill. His real claim to fame was placing volunteer prisoners in the murderous Skyrider, a pressure chamber which simulated high-altitude oxygen deprivation. I even heard there was a young woman there. Can you believe that? With 16 or 18 men? Can't be true. But if it is, she had to be a Gestapo spy.
Payne Best was a remarkable person. He was an officer in the British military intelligence who'd been captured by the Germans, and he spent the entire rest of the war in prison camp. He got to know Bonhoeffer in Buchenwald, where they were sharing the same corridor together.
Bonhoeffer was all humility and sweetness. He always seemed to me to diffuse an atmosphere of happiness, of joy in even the smallest event in life, and of deep gratitude for the mere fact that he was alive. He was one of the few men I have ever met to whom his God was real and ever close to him.
And he wasn't a religious type at all, but he and Bonhoeffer shared their tobacco. They shared the chess set. Bonhoeffer loved to play chess, and Payne Best gave him his chess set to amuse himself with in prison. Yeah, he gave him all sorts of things. He gave him a pair of golfing shoes, I believe, which I don't know how Best had acquired golfing shoes in a Nazi concentration camp, but he did. But this was part of prison life, I think, that people shared what little they had with each other.
Payne Best did not reckon with his survival. He thought when he was brought into the cellar in Buchenwald, this will be my last living place. When the air raids came, they hoped that this would end the war for the Jewish people who had survived in the concentration camps so far, and for peaceful people all over the world, including Germany. So their own lives were not as important to them as the end of the war was. Still, they all hoped to get out of prison and to be saved.
Dulles or Duluth?
Dulles.
Got it. Who is this man?
OSS Special Assistant to President Roosevelt, self-appointed liaison to the German resistance, and now negotiator-in-chief to get an orderly surrender of hundreds of thousands of German troops in Italy.
Well, Mr. Dulles has got some nerve if he's negotiating anything close to that.
Speaking of negotiating surrenders, Dulles is especially focused on a love affair with some bird named Mary Bancroft.
Somebody sounds jealous.
Hey, I've had plenty.
Children are about to go on air. Let's maintain a level of professionalism. All right. Going live. 3, 2, 1.
Hier meldet sich Vicky mit 3 Küssen und aufregenden Neuigkeiten. Was ich euch zu sagen habe, ist kaum zu glauben. Aber unsere Quelle ist gut informiert. Sie arbeitet für den amerikanischen Nachrichtendienst in der Schweiz. Seit kurzem gibt es Gespräche zwischen den Alliierten und deutschen Generälen, um das Leben Hunderttausender Deutscher zu retten. Das bestätigt, dass die Alliierten ihre Meinung geändert haben. Sie sind jetzt offen für Verhandlungen und fordern nicht mehr die bedingungslose Kapitulation. Gefangene können auf eine baldige Befreiung hoffen, da der Krieg in Deutschland bald zu Ende sein wird. Gute Zeiten stehen uns bevor, meine Freunde. Gute Zeiten. Freut euch darauf.
Great work, Agnes.
Are you okay, Otto?
I'm fine.
Are you sure?
It's all going to be gone. It's Kaiser Wilhelm Church, the Berlin Palace, Unter den Linden, the bridges. Even the trees of the Tiergarten are dead. Berlin was the capital of the world, a magnet for intellectuals. But after this bombing, it will never be the same.
It's true.
And my brother, and Dietrich, and Klaus, somewhere right now, they might be listening to our program and believing in their hearts that they might be rescued. And nothing could be further from the truth.
Churchill made it clear there were no lengths of violence to which we would not go to beat the life out of Germany. Initially, our airstrikes avoided civilians. Later, they became targets. Of course, I didn't firebomb working-class neighborhoods in Hamburg, or mock the victims as hamburger, as some did. But I did wonder what role our broadcasts were playing in the Allied policy of unconditional surrender. That policy, called for by Roosevelt, had doomed Otto's friends' efforts to negotiate with the Allies, to save Germany from complete destruction.
The British Foreign Office just pretended they were ignorant of German resistance before the war, which they were not. They had refused the conspirators' plea.
What Churchill feared was that if there was a link between German resistance and the British government, Stalin might say, you are cheating me.
The Russians obviously were fighting their own war, their own country, And it would be dreadful if the British had been thought to be making a separate deal with the Germans.
The German military forces were also starting to become more resolved to fight because of the demand for unconditional surrender. And the amount of casualties in the months after July 1944 till May of 1945 were disproportionately higher than the casualties before. And that was in part the price for the unconditional surrender.
This is General Patton speaking. We have received your messages and are moving in your direction. Just hold on. Just hold on.
All in the Buchenwald concentration camp could hear the approaching sounds of the Allied bombs and planes. It was decided that several of the VIP prisoners, including Dietrich and Payne Best, would be transported south, away from the Allied advance. Though the German transportation system was disintegrating and fuels in short supply, the Nazi High Command seemed to have some unknown purpose for these few.
There is the rumor that Himmler, the leader of the SS, one of the worst criminals of the Nazi era, he wanted to have a group of important prisoners to hand them over to the Allied people and save his own life, which was a ridiculous idea. But this may have been the reason why the prisoners from Buchenwald were brought to Schönberg in Bavaria, and most of them survived.
Concerning their ultimate destination and fate, the guards were as befuddled as the prisoners. It was decided they would stay in a small schoolhouse that had been converted into a makeshift shelter for prisoners.
I think that when Bonhoeffer had reached Schönberg with the others, he must have thought this was the end of my imprisonment. The Americans are very close. We'll be freed and the war will be over and that will be new life.
Hope was rising from them. Surely the Gestapo and the Nazi apparatus was no longer interested in them, way up in Berlin, which was being bombed to pieces at that time. They must have thought they were safe. And Bonhoeffer was not wanting to be a martyr. He was full of love of life. He's thinking of his parents, his friends, above all his fiancée, Maria, and thinking, my goodness me, it's only going to be a matter of days now and we'll be free.
Thanks to prisoner diaries, we know it was an exhausted but increasingly hopeful group that settled in for the night. One memoir was written by Fay von Hossel. Her father, a key member of the resistance, had been condemned by Freisler and hanged. These were bittersweet days for Faye. Her 2 young sons, wrenched from her by Nazi caretakers, were still missing. Yet tender feelings toward a fellow VIP prisoner were growing. His family name, the blackest in Germany, Stauffenberg. Dietrich was learning Russian from a young Soviet prisoner who was the nephew of Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov, of Molotov cocktail fame. Another VIP prisoner was a movie star and popular cabaret singer, Isa Van Meren. Isa had been entertaining German troops before her brother defected from the Abwehr, resulting in her arrest. Captain Payne Best, as imperious as ever, tells of nearly jumping out of his skin when one of the beds broke. Apparently, the beds were made with flimsy window blinds. Just as everyone in the room had settled down, Beth's own bed succumbed, much to the delight of the others. The group knew the Soviets had secured all of Eastern Europe and were rapidly approaching. To the west, they could occasionally hear the American aircraft. They could almost taste freedom in the clear Bavarian air.
This is it. Our last broadcast. I'm going to miss our little gang of rascals. Even you, Ian.
Oh.
Better to end now than the war go on forever.
About the finale, Sefton, I like your idea, but the GS1 went off the air with a bang, with gunfire. Why not also go out with a bang? And this record will do just the trick. Explosions.
Ian, this isn't 30 seconds over Tokyo. Really.
I've written something. Just hear it.
Look, I really don't have time
Take
for
it
this.
away,
I think
sweetie.
What is that sound? Allied bombers are here. The end has come, my loyal listeners. When you hear my voice next, who knows when that may be, may it be in that eternal city where death may touch no more.
we'll go with what's written, all right?
But why? Bombings are the reality of what would happen if we were broadcasting in Germany.
I don't care. I want Vicky to live. Even if our audience never hears her again, I want them to believe that she was real. So we'll go off quietly, without any explanation.
You're the boss.
Let's get ready to go live.
Hier meldet sich Vicky wieder mit weiteren unglaublichen Neuigkeiten von der Front. Die Alliierten und der Widerstand arbeiten jetzt Hand in Hand, um Städte und Hunderttausende Leben zu retten. So viel ist sicher. Der Krieg in Deutschland ist bald vorbei. Viele Familien werden bald wieder mit ihren Liebenden vereint sein. Ich wünsche euch und euren Lieben Kraft. Bleibt gesund und haltet durch.
We did it. We won. So why is it when I look at myself, all I see is a flabby-faced crook?
Euch. Ich bin Vicky und schicke euch 3 Küsse. Mua, mua, mua.
Tell me the truth, Otto. What do you think about what we've done?
I truly can't say.
I don't envy them their situation, but I envy their courage, their faith.
This was Dietrich's last Christmas Eve letter, sent before he was arrested by the Gestapo. We have been silent witnesses of evil deeds. We have been drenched by many storms. We have learnt the arts of equivocation and pretense. Experience has made us suspicious of others and kept us from being truthful and open. Intolerable conflicts have worn us down and even made us cynical. Are we still of any use?
I suppose we must all live with our doubts.
They spent this Sunday after Easter in this delightful little Bavarian village called Schönberg. And apparently it was a beautiful spring day. Bonhoeffer was always a great meditator on scripture, and he loved the set text for whichever day of the Christian year it was. And we know that the texts he preached on that Sunday were from Isaiah and from the first letter of Peter. And I like to think that he was probably imagining, if I had to preach a sermon today, I'd love to preach on these texts. And then his fellow prisoners said, come on, give us a sermon, Pastor Bonhoeffer.
And he has become friends on a short-term basis, very short-term, with a Russian atheist, and Korokin. And Bonhoeffer says, no, I think probably not. He feels that might be pushing church on a good atheist, and something doesn't sit well with him on that. But then it's Korokin who says, no, let's have this church service. But that's kind of typical of Bonhoeffer, both to deeply respect who the other is and wait for the invitation to respond with his own message of the gospel.
He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. At a time such as this, there are simply no words to express our sadness, our loss, and our pain. Our fragile words and emotions simply cannot capture the gravity of what has already happened and what we are yet to face. We have worked tirelessly confronting the masquerade of evil that has engulfed our world, always with the hope of restoring the good. But now our hands are tied and our destinies are fixed.
And one of the English prisoners who was with him, Hugh Falconer, said that he captured the thoughts of everyone there. He said, we're full of hope, we're full of anxiety too. We want to be back with our families, our loved ones. What we can really rely on, though, is that God is with us and our salvation is certain in him. That's what we've got to put our hope in.
Through the experience and words of Isaiah, a word does come from beyond to remind us that God Himself was bruised for our iniquities and wounded for our transgressions. God has always shared in the pain of His broken creation.
And also that other remarkable English prisoner called Captain Payne Best, he says that Bonhoeffer sort of expressed the spirit of everyone there. He was able not just to say this is what the Bible says, but this is how we are feeling, and this is how we can bring our feelings to God, and God can be with us and speak to us in this situation.
And when we no longer have the personal strength to hold on to the promise of God, we can know that He will hold on to us. Let us join together and sing, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God."
Almighty fortress is our God, our bulwark never failing. Our helper, He outweighs the flood, of mortal ills prevailing.
May God and His mercy lead us through these times, but above all, may He lead us to Himself.
Prisoner Bonhoeffer, come with us.
A general found the files which Dohnányi had kept with all the crimes Hitler and his gang had committed, made an excerpt from this and presented it to Hitler. And Hitler got into a terrible rage and said, I want all of them liquidated. When they were looking for the entire group, one person was missing, namely Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Can you deliver a message to George Bell?
Of course.
Tell the bishop that I believe in the principle of our universal Christian brotherhood, which rises above all national interests, and that our victory is certain.
Goodbye, my friend.
Farewell. This is the end, but for me, the beginning of life.
Terrible as this story is, it was not without God's commands. And Bonhoeffer knew that himself. He says, Hitler cannot kill me. The hour of my death will be prescribed by the living God Himself. And he almost escaped in Schönberg with the others when God allowed him to become a martyr, which made him a much more important figure for future times.
So Dietrich was transported to Flossenburg. This was a camp where Allied prisoners were hanged on Christmas Eve in 1944, with lights on the trees in holiday glee. Another group slaughtered on Easter morning, as if the life of Christ was used as a calendar for cruelty. There was no escape for the thousands that met their end there.
He knew what was in store for him, and he and I think it was 5, 6 other of the conspirators were that night put in front of a court-martial by the SS.
It was a farce. The verdict had been pronounced by Hitler already. There was a court-martial that didn't even meet the standards of a court-martial. There was no real proceeding, there was no evidence, there were no witnesses, and apparently the whole thing happened in a matter of 2 or 3 hours. The SS people just tried to keep up the semblance of justice in order not to be convicted for unjust murder.
Prisoner Bonhoeffer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, born February 4th, 1906, and today's date. Must keep the records in order. Thank you for arriving early. Punctual. Must be German. Clothes. Well, Prisoner Bonhoeffer, I have some good and bad news for you. The bad news is, it's damn cold out there, and you'll be wearing only glasses. Oops, we need those too. And wouldn't you know it? The crematorium is out of order. But the good news is, Herbert has a nice fire going just steps from the gallows. Let's get going. Stay ahead of the shepherds. Happy journey, gallows bird.
When the tyrant executes the martyr, the tyrant's power ends because he can't do any more than that. But the power of the martyr begins because his witness goes on forever. And I always think of that remark when I think of these resistors. They were the people who won the battle of faith and courage and conviction and human dignity. And it's to them that we now look today.
Dear Sefton, I am writing to communicate a disturbing discovery. I was recently informed by some German escapees that civilians during the war were hanged simply for listening to our radio broadcasts. Were you aware such actions took place? Please reply, Agnes.
The stirring victory keeps Chelsea at the top of Division 1. This is the BBC World Service, the 6 o'clock news read by Nigel Smithers. We deviate from our regular broadcast to take you to the Holy Trinity Church in London for the memorial service of Dietrich and Klaus Bonhoeffer. The next voice you hear will be that of Bishop George Bell.
It was in May 1942 that I had my last sight of Dietrich in Stockholm, when altogether unexpected he came from Berlin, at the risk of his life, to give me much information of the utmost importance about the movement of the opposition in Germany, to eliminate Hitler and all his chief colleagues, and to set up a new government which should undo Hitler's deeds as far as they could be undone.
And to seek peace with the Allies. Very moving was our talk, very moving our farewell. And now Dietrich has gone. He died with his brother Klaus as a hostage. Our debt to them and to all others similarly murdered is immense. His death is a death for Germany, indeed for Europe too. He made the sacrifice of human prospects, of home, friends and career, because he believed in God's vocation for his country and refused to follow those false leaders who were the servants of the devil.
He was inspired by his faith in the living God and by his devotion to truth and honour. As one of a noble company of martyrs of differing traditions, he represents both the resistance of the believing soul in the name of God to the assault of evil, and also the moral and political revolt of the human conscience against injustice and cruelty. To our earthly view, Dietrich is dead.
Deep and unfathomable as our sorrow seems, let us comfort one another with these words. For him and Klaus, and for the countless multitudes of their fellow victims through these terrible years of war, there is the resurrection from the dead.
The hope of a new life. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church.